Good morning, good evening, friends. Welcome to my channel called Ek Kitab Se Ek Moti, which in English means a pearl or gem from a book. Today is a special occasion. It's the Martin Luther King Jr. or JR Day, and it's a federal holiday in the United States, observed on the third Monday of January each year. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is one of my role models, I would like to dedicate this video to him, and this video will be about his ideas as well. So I'm going to read a portion from this great book. It's titled A Gift of Love. Actually, I think the name of the author is also part of the title, it seems. Martin Luther King Jr., A Gift of Love. So this is a great book. It's part of the Penguin Modern Classics series. Before I read a portion from this book, let me just read his biography of a few lines that's mentioned here at the beginning of the book. So it says, born in 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia, Martin Luther King Jr. was a Baptist minister, theologian, and a prominent leader of the civil rights movement. Widely regarded as one of the greatest activists in world history, he became the youngest person to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, aged 35. King was assassinated on April 4, 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee. So that's a very, very, very brief biography of King here. So let me read this portion from chapter 7, and it's titled The Man Who Was a Fool. Now, this book actually is a collection of his sermons and talks. Martin Luther King is primarily known for his great speech, I Have a Dream, which most of you may be aware of. One of its famous lines is this: I have a dream that one day my 4 little children will live in a country where they are judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. Now, that's a very powerful speech, so I recommend that. I think YouTube has that speech. I think several channels have that speech, and with subtitles. The speech contains references to certain historical persons and certain people who at that time were prominent or famous in the United States. So you may have to just do some research on those names that Dr. King mentions in that speech. But it also contains many concepts that are timeless. So they are still relevant and they still matter. So let me read this portion today, and then I'm going to briefly discuss it, and I hope you'll like it. Chapter 7, The Man Who Was a Fool. It begins with a quotation from the Bible. It's a verse from Luke chapter 12, verse 20. Thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Now, the next few paragraphs, you'll understand the context of this, and Martin Luther King will add his own interpretation of this verse. I would like to share with you a dramatic little story that is significantly relevant in its implications and profoundly meaningful in its conclusions. It is the story of a man who, by all modern standards, would be considered eminently successful, yet Jesus called him a fool. The central character in the drama is a certain rich man whose farm yielded such heavy crops that he decided to build new and larger barns, saying, There will I bestow all my fruits and my goods, and I will say to my soul, Soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, Thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. And it was so. That is, he died. The rich fool died. At the height of his prosperity, he died. Think of this man. If he lived in our community today, he would be considered a big shot, that is, a big man. He would abound with social prestige and community respectability. Prestige has two pronunciations, especially in American English. So it has this pronunciation, prestige, and also the other one, prestige. So both the pronunciations are correct. He would abound with social prestige and community respectability. He would be one of the privileged few in the economic power structure. And yet a Galilean peasant had the audacity to call him a fool. Galilean peasant is Jesus. He was, I think, preached his sermons in Galilee and in some of the other cities and towns of Jerusalem, I think. I'm not very sure of the geographical locations of biblical places, but Galilean peasant refers to Jesus. Jesus did not call this man a fool merely because he possessed wealth. Jesus never made a sweeping indictment against wealth. Rather, he condemned the misuse of wealth. So Jesus was not critical of this man because he was wealthy, but because he misused his wealth. Money, like any other force such as electricity. Now, electricity, the stress is on the syllable tris, electricity. But some people also pronounce it as electricity. But it sounds better with the standard pronunciation, and which is this, electricity. Money, like any other force, such as electricity, is amoral. And amoral in a sense, it's neutral. It's not related to morality unless we know how it's used. So we cannot judge whether money is moral or not unless we find out how it has been used. Money, like any other force, such as electricity, is amoral and can be used for either good or evil. It is true that Jesus commanded the rich young ruler to sell all, but in this instance, as Dr. George A. Buttrick has said, Jesus was prescribing individual surgery, not making a universal diagnosis. Now, this requires some clarification. Dr. King is referring to a story in the Bible where a certain rich man approaches Jesus and he asks him what he should do to lead a perfect life. And among other things, Jesus asks him to sell everything he has. But the rich man doesn't do it, and he kind of becomes discouraged or sad and goes away. So that's a story in the Bible, and this is a reference to that story. Nothing in wealth is inherently vicious, and nothing in poverty is inherently virtuous. Jesus did not condemn this man because he had made money in a dishonest fashion. Apparently, he acquired his wealth by hard work and the practical know-how and far-sighted vision of a good businessman. Why then was he a fool? The rich man was a fool because he permitted the ends for which he lived to become confused with the means by which he lived. The economic structure of his life absorbed his destiny. Each of us lives in two realms, the internal and the external. The internal is that realm of spiritual ends expressed in art, literature, morals, and religion. The external is that complex of devices, techniques, mechanisms, and instrumentalities by means of which we live. Remember, emphasizing words is very important, otherwise the meaning gets obscured. So I think I didn't put the proper emphasis the first time I read it. So let me read the sentence again. The external is that complex of devices, techniques, mechanisms, and instrumentalities by means of which we live. These include the house we live in, the car we drive, the clothes we wear, the economic sources we acquire, the material stuff we must have to exist. There is always a danger that we will permit the means by which we live to replace the ends for which we live, the internal to become lost in the external. The rich man was a fool because he failed to keep a line of distinction between means and ends, between structure and destiny. His life was submerged in the rolling waters of his livelihood. This does not mean that the external in our lives is not important. We have both a privilege and a duty to seek the basic material necessities of life. Only an irrelevant religion fails to be concerned about man's economic well-being. Religion at its best realizes that the soul is crushed as long as the body is tortured with hunger pangs and harrowed with the need for shelter. Jesus realized that we need food, clothing, shelter, and economic security. He said in clear and concise terms, "Your Father knoweth what things ye have need of." But Jesus knew that man was more than a dog to be satisfied by a few economic bones. He realized that the internal of a man's life is as significant as the external. So he added, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." The tragedy of the rich man was that he sought the means first, and in the process the ends were swallowed in the means. And the final paragraph, the richer this man became materially, the poorer he became intellectually and spiritually. He may have been married, but he probably could not love his wife. It is possible that he gave her countless material gifts, but he could not give her that which she needed most, love and affection. He may have had children, but he probably did not appreciate them. He may have had the great books of the ages shelved neatly in his library, but he never read them. He may have had access to great music, but he did not listen. His eyes did not behold the majestic splendor of the skies. His ears were not attuned to the melodious sweetness of heavenly music. His mind was closed to the insights of poets, prophets, and philosophers. His title was justly merited, "Thou Fool." Now that's magnificent English. I think just reading a page or two of Dr. King daily is a good exercise in improving one's diction, articulation, pronunciation, and vocabulary. Actually, frankly, some of the words he has used, I'm not very sure if I totally understand the meaning, like harrowed, for instance. So I will have to check the dictionary, consult my dictionary. But that doesn't matter. Most of the words are very clear. I don't think he uses very complicated vocabulary, but he chooses beautiful words of the English language. And one more thing you may have noticed is that when I was reading these biblical quotations or biblical verses, the language was slightly different. For example, your Father knoweth, not your Father knows. What things ye have need of, what things you have need of. That's because this is King James Bible English. The King James Bible, I think, was published in the year 1611, and it's considered a masterpiece of English literature. So King James was responsible for the publication of that great book, and the English language owes him a lot. And I think the publication of the King James Bible also kind of fixed the English language at the time. If you check the English of Shakespeare, it's quite similar to the King James English, but the language was still developing, and the sentence structures could be a bit difficult when you read Shakespeare. It's not easy to understand the sentences used by William Shakespeare. So if you if you really want to enjoy the plays and the sonnets, that is his poems, if you really want to enjoy his works, Shakespeare's works, I recommend that you read some of these publications where you have the Shakespeare version on the left hand, and on the right hand, in parallel, you have the modern English version of the same text. So it's easier to understand Shakespeare, and it's easier to read as well. If you've tried reading Shakespeare, you'll see that you get stuck often because the words he has used, some of the words are no longer used, and some of the words that are used even today, some of them have changed their meanings. So it's quite difficult to understand Shakespeare. The sonnets are different, I think, because these are short poems. It's a bit easier to understand his sonnets, but still, even in the sonnets, you'll notice usage that has become kind of old-fashioned. With regard to the King James Bible, the English is still quite modern. I mean, we can still understand most of what it contains, except the fact that the grammar is different. So you'll have all these forms, knoweth, or thou art, or strengtheneth instead of strengthens, and which being used for human beings. So there are a few exceptions. So it differs from modern English, but it still is a masterpiece of English literature. And I recommend that if you want to improve your English, you can buy a copy of the King James version of the Bible, KJV. I'm sorry, it's also called KJV, also the KJB, or the authorized version. I'm sorry for the digression, but I think there was a need for this clarification as to why the language was a bit different when Dr. King was quoting the Bible. So now let's have a brief discussion on what I've just read. So the rich man was a fool not because he had money. Money, as even this passage says, is morally neutral. It's usage that counts. So if money becomes the end of our life instead of being the means, then it becomes a bad master. I mean, it becomes a bad goal for our lives, because as this passage says, we are both spiritual and material beings. And this rich man was a fool because his focus was the material life. Because in this quotation that Dr. King has referred to, this person says, "Soul," that is, he's referring to his own internal self, "thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry." So his focus was mostly on material objects. So he was considering his material belongings, that is money and property and grains and cattle, to be his primary source of satisfaction in life. And he was he felt that he felt that these things were enough to keep him happy in his life. But then God tells him that that night his soul was required of him. That is, he had to die. So what do we learn from these passages that I have just read? What we learn is material things are important in life, but spiritual things are equally important, if not more. Human beings don't just need food and shelter and clothing, all these material improvements that we see around us, cars and railways and airplanes and other means of fast transport and mobile phones and access to computers and access to all the modern technology. These things are great, and these are the result of human creativity and human prowess and human intellect. But material things alone do not satisfy human beings. That's why we need good literature to enjoy life. We have literature in all languages. We have great poems and great novels, great stories that elevate our emotions and make us nobler than what we are at the moment. If it were not for these great stories and novels and poems, most of us would be bereft of much of our nobility. For example, if you read the noble stories of Tolstoy, you just feel that sense of unity with all existence. If you read the noble works of Milton, for example, Paradise Lost, I mean, you feel that sense of grand, noble goals of humanity, and many other extraordinary things are there in the works of John Milton. I think, if I remember it correctly, one of the phrases of Milton is, "Whatever in me is dark, illumine. Whatever in me is low, raise and support." I mean, these are magnificent lines. And there's one line of Satan where he says it's better to reign in hell, that is, rule in hell, than serve in heaven. So that's kind of an attitude of an arrogant person, but still it's got this nice, powerful attitude of Satan. Although this fellow is bad, he has a strong willpower. I think Swami Vivekananda had some admiration for this character of Satan as portrayed by John Milton. So there is some good things that we can learn from the character of Satan as well in Paradise Lost. So we have good literature. Other examples of good literature can be, let me see if I can recall a few great English works. So we have, as I said, we have Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, and we have Tolstoy's great work War and Peace, Dostoevsky. Actually, these are translated works from Russian. I'm sorry. Dostoevsky. His name is a little difficult to pronounce, so I'm not sure whether it's Dostoevsky or Dostoevsky. So his works are amazing. I read one of his books a long time ago, Crime and Punishment. It's about the conflict that goes on into the mind of a criminal and why he thinks the way he thinks, and what happens in the mind of a person before that person commits crime, and things like that. Nice psychological analysis of a person. And other than these classics, you also have certain other works. For example, you have the speeches of Abraham Lincoln. These are elevating. His Gettysburg Address is something that I think everyone should know. Anyone who knows the English language should read that speech. It's a very short speech, I think 200 or 300 words, or maybe close to that, but I'm not sure about the exact number, but it's a short speech. So I recommend that, the Gettysburg Address. So literature elevates our lives, so we need literature as well. All these are connected to our spirit. So remember, when Dr. King talks about spiritual things, it's not just about religious things. Even Marxists and communists, who usually don't believe in God, accept the value of literature, and so they give importance to spiritual development. But spiritual things need not be connected with God alone. They are the things that we can't see, or that we usually cannot measure, or that cannot be attached to material wealth. So these are things that are spiritual. These are internal things. So we talked about literature. Then we have art. I mean, the great works of art that I think it's Michelangelo. I'm not sure whether that's the right pronunciation. The paintings of Michelangelo, and I think Raphael, if I'm not mistaken. Raphael was a great artist of the past. And then we have art in the form of movies. I mean, I think it was Akira Kurosawa. Again, it's a Japanese name. My apologies if I'm mispronouncing his name. Akira Kurosawa or something of that sort. I think he's a famous, I think, Japanese movie director. He said that if someone has not watched Pather Panchali, he or she hasn't watched the moon or the sun. So he was referring to the movie directed by Satyajit Ray. Pather Panchali was his classic, and he became world famous because of that movie, and it's considered a masterpiece of art. I've watched it. It's amazing. I mean, the camera work is just beautiful. The background music, the location, and the emotions expressed without words. I mean, it does have dialogues, but you don't need words to um, you know um, kind of appreciate the emotions felt by the characters. Many of the scenes that have become kind of very famous, and they are masterpiece of art. They don't have too many dialogues in that movie. So we have movies, we have literature, we have philosophy. So other than material things around us, we need philosophical kind of discussions in our lives. So we have these ancient philosophers: Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and quite a few. We have Spinoza, and we have Descartes and John Locke. These are Western philosophers. In India, we had several philosophers. I'm sorry. We had Shankaracharya, we had Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, and many other philosophers in India as well. I think Kanad was one of the philosophers. So we can spend time reading philosophy. Let me see if he mentions any other thing other than these which are related to our spiritual development. Um, Also, things related to linguistic improvement. So, sometimes we develop our language skills not just to earn more, but just to enjoy the language. Language is something that we can enjoy. We don't have to always think of the material benefit of improving our language. We just speak well and try to write well, just to admire the beauty of the language. I think it was G.H. Hardy, the mathematician, who was responsible for Ramanujan's fame, and who brought him into the limelight and made the world aware of his genius. So G.H. Hardy, in his book on mathematics, has said something of a similar sorts for the activity of mathematics. So he said it's just a beautiful experience when someone looks at a beautiful equation. It need not have any material benefit for society. It's just to be enjoyed. So and well, yeah, I think I missed this thing, morality. So other than our material development, we also need moral development. Without moral development, all this development that we see around us can be destroyed. Just as we saw during the Second World War, entire cities were destroyed. So morality is essential in order for us to keep enjoying the material advances that we have achieved because of science, reason, and freedom around the world. So let me just briefly recapitulate. That is, let me summarize what I just said. So human being is not just human beings can never be satisfied with just material advancement in their life, not the money alone, or cars and buildings and homes and land and gold. All these alone, to the exclusion of spiritual development, will not lead to a happy life for any human being. We need spiritual things as well in our lives uh, to lead a healthy and complete life. So we need literature, we need poetry, we need art, we need morality, we need philosophy, science, and we need a lot of other intellectual things as well to enjoy life in its totality and to live a complete life. I hope you like this video. So I think Martin Luther King Jr.'s ideals are still alive, and people still can draw inspiration from his writings and speeches. So with these words, let me conclude today's video. Thanks a lot for watching.